episode 5 of WandaVision just came out for us. It had a crazy reveal at the end with all sorts of implications for the MCU's future. And it kind of got our gears turning. Obviously it was Quicksilver appearing, possibly from another dimension. Who knows? We're going to stick a pin in that. But what it got us thinking about, since this guy who appeared before us is a mutant, was in his, native universe, it got us thinking, will Wanda spark the event that brings mutants into the MCU? So we kind of have these sort of two trains that we're going to run with, these two theories. But yeah, we're just kind of jump into it.
Yeah.
So it's been widely theorized by others and by us that Mephisto is going to be the sort of secret villain of WandaVision. And we actually made a video about that, so if you want to know, in depth why we think that is the case, then check that out. But it's based on, interactions that have happened in the comics. One such interaction is an interaction between Mephisto and Wanda. And, after this interaction, Wanda kind of goes a bit bananas.
She loses her mind and does some pretty substantial stuff in the comics. And I've been theorizing that we're kind of going down this route since the beginning of WandaVision. It's kind of been a thought that I've had since going into the series. And so the event we're referring to is the House of M, and to greatly simplify it, she loses her mind and essentially rids the world of mutants. And so how are they going to do that in the WandaVision, you may be asking?
In the MCU, there aren't even any mutants. So how could she get rid of the mutants?
I'll tell you how. We do it in reverse.
Oh.
So, my thought has been, potentially, it's just House of M, but opposite. She loses her mind, has the deal with Mephisto, and instead of taking mutants out of the world, she brings them into it. And so, we know that mutants are coming based on countless theorizing by us or anyone else on the internet, but more specifically, something that Kevin Feige said. He specifically said that mutants are coming, the X-Men are coming. And so it's with that, it kind of takes us less of the point that if that's going to happen, but how. And so what we have right now is two ways to get there. One is kind of an Infinity Stone theory, and then the second is multiverse theory.
Both could involve the Infinity Stones, creating the event. Infinity Stone powered beings.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. And so the first one that we've been thinking is that it will be this trickle of Infinity Stones. Wanda's powered by Infinity Stones. We talked about someone else potentially being powered by an Infinity Stone in our other video here.
Check out that video.
And this will make a whole lot more sense. But so we believe that the Reality Stone will also be in play, combined with
powers of the
Reality Stone, not the Reality Stone itself, because it's destroyed. But powers of the Reality Stone mixed with powers that Wanda has from the Mind Stone. And so we think that potentially the combination of those two, since we know that Infinity Stones have the power to create universal change, and so we think that potentially
people powered by Infinity Stones may be able to create global mass change.
Yeah. And so we're thinking that potentially the combination of the Reality and Mind Stone, or people powered by them, could be enough to unlock the mutant gene in people dormant around the world.
Yeah, and so kind of a theory that we have about how that might happen is that, people can tap into the WandaVision broadcast, right? And so if that broadcast is amplified and, via the power of the Mind Stone and the power of the Reality Stone.
And the power of television.
And the power of television. If that is broadcast on a larger scale to everyone around the world,
possibly with the hex.
Yeah, maybe even the hex itself just like
Expanding.
expands around the world, and it can physically change certain things. And
which,
we've seen, which could be the reality stone aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it could also unlock something within the old brain and the genetic code, which could be
we
more
got the mind stone
along
to
the lines
tap
of
into
the
the
mind
mind
stone,
and
yeah.
the reality to
change the
mess
physical,
with the physical
aspects. And so if the WandaVision broadcast is broadcast across the entire world, maybe certain people with the dormant mutant gene will be unlocked, and all around the world the normal citizens of the MCU there's all of a sudden going to be all these mutants in the MCU. I guess kind of the one proof to this possibly being the case is that after Monica is, back at their
expelled from the
hex, we see the results of her MRI, and they're just blank.
And so her various tests are coming up negative.
It's implied that her blood work also needs a second go. And so something happened to Monica. Whether that's she's a mutant now, or if she's gotten other powers, maybe we'll talk about that in another video. Something's different about Monica. Maybe she's the very first mutant. Who knows?
Until the end of the episode.
Yeah. Our other branching off theory is that this will be a multiverse situation.
And this one is supported, again, by the fact that we know the multiverse is coming.
And by the fact that a character from a non-MCU dimension is now in the MCU, which is pretty hard evidence.
Yeah.
We see Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, which has always been disconnected from the MCU. He's here now. We know that Mephisto in the comics is an interdimensional being, and so that could have possibly been the work of Mephisto. Pietro is dead in this universe, so they went to another dimension and pulled out a Peter and put him in there. So we now have our third Peter. And so if Mephisto / Wanda, it can bring somebody from another dimension, if they can bring one person, why can't they bring more? And so an interesting sort of connective tissue here is hello.
It's that cat.
It's that cat. Come sit on my lap, you little mutant. Another little piece of connective tissue here is that currently where we are in WandaVision is kind of 80s era.
Yes.
And that's kind of one of the places that we last saw our mutant friends in the
Fox universe.
In the Fox universe. And so if we're bringing those characters from their 80s lives, 80s, 90s, as WandaVision keeps evolving, those characters are going to be able to keep their original origins if they're brought over, from the 80s, 90s place of their timeline.
Yeah. Which really helps when you get into characters like Magneto and Professor X, whose lives are very entwined with historical events and being from a past time period.
Exactly.
And so it would be a lot harder to have those guys in 2025, 2023, where the MCU is now. We can't have these two brittle old men fighting. You know?
Especially with Magneto, where his origins are a specific event in history.
And it's not to say that you can't change these things up,
but it's a very cool and specific
it's just a super cool origin. Like we've seen just push her off. we've seen characters' origins be changed up and it worked perfectly fine.
Mhm.
Iron Man is a great example of that.
Yeah.
The first Iron Man, had that been put out now, well, and that's another example. We've been going a lot more comic accurate, so it'd be kind of a toss up how people would feel about it. But
Mhm.
yeah, Iron Man is a great example of kind of changing up an origin and doing it a bit differently. And so we know it can happen.
Yeah. It's a bit different with Magneto when it's such a specific event, though.
Yes.
And so this would give sort of an
And-
out to that.
Yeah.
And so, maybe it'll be the same, power surge created by Wanda slash, Mephisto, to their powers combined, opening a rift in the multiverse.
And I think that's just if I think either way, it's gonna be some sort of combination of Wanda and the one pulling the strings to either bring the mutants in or open up the multiverse to lead down the path to bring them in.
Yeah. And so I guess just something else to mention is that we don't know what kind of multiverse this is going to be. We don't know if this version of Quicksilver is exactly the version that we see in Days of Future Past and Apocalypse. We think it's unlikely. But, like, is it pulled straight from there? Or is it more like when we see J. Jonah Jameson played by J.K. Simmons in Spider-Man Far From Home? Because obviously it's not the same version of J. Jonah Jameson. Obviously, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man didn't exist in the MCU, and all of that stuff happened. That didn't happen in the MCU. And so this version, they just brought J.K. Simmons back because, I guess
we're just saying that whatever dimension it is, J.K. Simmons is J. Jonah Jameson.
Is always J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah.
In this version, Spider-Man looks like Tom Holland instead of Tobey Maguire, but J. Jonah Jameson always looks like J.K. Simmons.
Yeah.
And so, it could be sort of that they're bringing a version of Quicksilver from a X-Men dimension, but it's not necessarily the X-Men dimension that we've seen in Days of Future Past and Apocalypse. It's sort of a sister dimension to that.
Yeah. It's kind of like in Enter the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse. It's kind of like it's kind of like the Sony Spider-Verse movie where the Peter B. Parker's life is very similar to the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, but it's not quite.
It's not quite. Or like how in Logan, it's the continuation of
the first X-Men.
It's kind of the continuation of the first X-Men, but sort of different because in this universe, Professor X killed all the X-Men. It's
or similar to in Deadpool, how he can reference any event. We're talking about Patrick Stewart, Professor X, but now we're talking about McAvoy, but it's Deadpool 2, and we're in the mansion, and here's all the young X-Men.
Yeah.
Just kind of someplace where it doesn't really make sense, but it's parallel.
It's parallel, yeah. It's taken from a different dimension that is, similar enough
that you can watch those movies and get their story, but it's not exactly so that we can get away from Fox.
I guess so, yeah. It could very well be. And so, that means that they could sort of pick and choose which characters they want to recast
and I think that's
keep,
very likely.
Because and that's where you're going to see the difference in the dimension, because if in fact they do bring over more characters, they open more of a rift or sort of simultaneously transport a bunch more of
or
people
maybe it's
from
a trickling effect.
Yeah.
Where it begins in WandaVision and we see the effects through Spider-Man, as many people have theorized, and then it all caps off in Multiverse of Madness.
But anyways, it's where we're going to see what is different about the dimension that Quicksilver is being pulled from. We're going to see how that's different from the actual Fox universe, because maybe in the universe that he's being pulled from, Professor X is not played by James McAvoy. Because if the Professor X that we get is not James McAvoy, then that just means that in that sister dimension, that's not what he looked like.
Yeah.
You know, they're able to pick and choose because, like, while it is very delicate territory, it's also very easy to just say, oh, it's a different dimension.
It's a slightly different dimension.
And I don't want them to get sloppy, but they can pull it off because it is very weird if it is just the same Fox dimensions, because those kind of
every X-Men movie was in a different dimension than the last.
Yeah, you know, so that's already very confusing.
Continuity.
Continuity?
Things were never. Yeah, it's super continuous in the X-Men universe. Yeah. You know, we saw things change from movie to movie.
And
you know,
timelines
shift and things get weird. Another thing to mention with that though is that I think every second that we have this Quicksilver on screen, we'll get more of an idea of the universe that he came from.
Yeah.
You know, another option here, this is kind of the lame option, but I do want to put it in there just to have it said, is maybe this is not a different universe Quicksilver at all. Maybe this is just whoever Evan Peters is in this universe.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. It
and
could
it's kind
be
of
an external.
It's an external.
It's an external universe because Mephisto is an interdimensional being, and so it could be that this Quicksilver, you know, it's more of a meta reference, and this is actually just a person in the MCU. You know, that Mephisto decided, like, or Wanda decided, whoever did it, was like, this guy, you know, is Pietro in this universe.
Yeah. But that said, one, we don't think Wanda did it. You know, I think that's another thing that she said that was true, that she wasn't the one that brought him there. Two, they're not going to do that. That would be super lame.
That'd be very
lame.
So
we think that this is definitely going to be a Quicksilver. And that said, the Quicksilver that he is, just another point to mention, is that Magneto's his dad in that one, which is comic accurate. Magneto being the father of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, which could be something very interesting to bring up
arc.
Because of the fact. Just another thing that was pointed out in the past episode is they brought up the names and just reminding us about the parents of the Maximoffs.
Yeah, they said this guy was named Oleg Maximoff, not Eric Lyncher.
Yeah, and it was so just
it's kind of saying, hey, you know, this wasn't Wanda's dad in this universe, but maybe if Magneto came in, that could be an interesting arc, and that could be an interesting father-daughter relationship that eventually, you know,
unfolds.
Comes to fruition.
Yeah. Another thing is just kind of that even if the mutants either appear now or appear at the end of Multiverse of Madness, I think an advantage of them appearing now is event or multiverse clash is they appear now and we have time for them to, people have got powers now, or they've always had powers. The universes are colliding. It gives us time for the X-Men to form in this universe. And so by the time Multiverse of Madness passes and we get past that, then we can see, oh wow, we've got X-Men in this universe starting to form. The other thing is they could have already been together in their universe.
Yeah, and that's another benefit to them coming from a different dimension as opposed to all the mutants just being created, is that they'll be institutionalized. They'll be able to find you know, each other, and they'll be like, Scott, where are we?
Yeah, and so that will be a lot more likely if they just show up in Multiverse of Madness, if that's when everything collides, you know, and now there's a X-Mansion just hanging out over there, you know, and they've always been there, but the universes have just melded.
Yeah, and so the multiverse is coming. And so this is kind of just our take on how it may happen based on what we've seen and based on, you know, how the MCU is lining up with the comics once again.
And, like, we're not saying that if our Infinity Stone plan was to be in effect, that the multiverse wouldn't happen, because obviously we know the multiverse is happening. We don't think that necessarily discounts our Infinity Stone idea.
Yeah.
It just could be things that tie together.
Yeah.
And it's just fun to theorize about this stuff.
Yeah, what creates the multiverse or the creation of the mutants is not necessarily going to be because of the power of the Mind Stone and the power of the Reality Stone. It could just be Wanda does a big blast, you know? Yeah. It's not necessarily that. That's just sort of tying to our other theory.
Exactly.
That we did and that you should check out. And so, do you think that any one of our theories is more likely than the other.
We'll probably find out quite a bit of information this coming Friday.
Yeah, is if Pietro has his powers, if he's speeding around,
That would be so exciting.
then it's heavily he's not just going to be some citizen,
guy, yeah.
And so I think that there's some pretty good evidence stacked in the multiverse theory because we already have this character who was Quicksilver in another universe in this universe. Yeah. That's some pretty multi-dimensional things going on there. Yeah. And so
let us know what you thought of what we have to say. Let us know what you have to say. Yeah, no spoilers to each other. I know some people were trying to find leaks and stuff. Keep that away from here.
No leaks in the comments. Also, if you watch this video and you haven't seen WandaVision, what are you doing here, man?
That doesn't really make any sense. We had a spoiler alert at the beginning.
Yeah, we definitely did.
And why would you have gotten to this one when we've got like 3 other ones before it? Go watch them first.
Yeah. Go spoil yourself in order. If you're going to do something wrong, do it right? Anyways, enjoy your day.
Or your night.
Or your mid-afternoon snack.
Wherever you are. Future, past, days
of future past? Okay, we should stop now.
We need to stop.